Own it. By Depth Works. Introduction. The question that changes everything. There is a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Not because they don't know it exists, not because they haven't heard it before, but because the honest answer to it is uncomfortable. And discomfort, real discomfort, the kind that requires you to look clearly at yourself, is something we are very good at not doing. The question is this: what is my part in this? Not, whose fault is it? Not, what went wrong? Not, what should other people have done differently? Those questions are easier. They point outward. They keep the spotlight off you, and in the spotlight's shadow, you can stay small and safe and unaccountable. What is my part in this? Points inward. It asks you to look at the choices you made, the actions you took or didn't take, the ways you contributed to the outcome, good or bad, that you are now standing in the middle of. This question is the beginning of ownership. And ownership, real ownership, taken without drama or self-punishment, with clear eyes and a willingness to act, is one of the most liberating things a person can do. This book is not about blame, not yours, not anyone else's. It is not about self-flagellation, about turning every problem into an indictment of your character, about carrying guilt like a badge of seriousness. It is about something quieter and more powerful than any of that. It is about the shift that happens when you stop explaining your life and start directing it. When you stop waiting for something outside you to change and start changing what is inside your reach. When you stop being the subject of your own story and start being its author. 6 chapters. Each one a different dimension of what it means to own your life. Fully, honestly, without excuses. The question is simple. The answer takes a lifetime. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Stories We Tell Instead. Before we can talk about ownership, we have to talk about what we do instead. Because the human mind is extraordinarily creative when it comes to avoiding accountability. It produces stories, explanations, framings, narratives that place the cause of our situation outside ourselves and leave us conveniently as the subject of forces beyond our control. Some of these stories are true. Circumstances are real. Other people's behavior is real. Systemic disadvantage is real. Luck, good and bad, is real. It would be dishonest and wrong to say that everything that happens to you is your fault. But there is a difference between acknowledging real external factors and using them as a permanent explanation for why your life is the way it is. The first is accurate. The second is a trap. Here are the most common stories we tell instead of owning our part. The first is the victim story. In the victim story, things happen to you. People do things to you. Circumstances conspire against you. You are the object of the sentence. Acted upon, never acting. The victim story is not always wrong in its facts, but it is always limiting in its orientation. Because if you are purely the victim of what happens, then you are also purely powerless to change it. You are waiting for the world to become different before your life can become different. And the world notoriously does not reorganize itself around your waiting. The second is the timing story. It's not that I'm not capable, it's just not the right time. I would have, but the circumstances weren't right. I'm going to once things settle down. The timing story is sophisticated because it acknowledges your intention without requiring your action. It keeps possibility alive without requiring you to move toward it. And it can be sustained indefinitely because there is always a reason that right now is not quite the right time. The third is the comparison story. Other people have it easier. Other people had advantages I didn't have. If I had their resources, their background, their connections, I would have been further along by now. The comparison story measures your situation against the best-case version of someone else's, ignores everything you can't see about their actual difficulties, and uses the gap as justification for not moving. The fourth, and perhaps the most insidious, is the complexity story. My situation is complicated. You don't understand the full picture. There are factors at play that make it impossible to act right now. The complexity story uses the genuine messiness of real life to create a kind of paralysis that looks from the inside like wisdom. It is often the most intelligent-seeming avoidance of all. None of these stories are lies exactly. They each contain elements of truth. That is what makes them so effective and so dangerous. The question is not whether these factors exist. The question is whether you are using them as an explanation or as an excuse. An explanation says, here is why things are the way they are. An excuse says, here is why I cannot change them. The first is accurate. The second surrenders your agency. And agency, the belief that your choices matter, that your actions have effects, that you are not merely the product of your circumstances, is the foundation of everything in this book. What story are you telling? About your career, your health, your relationships, your finances, your progress toward the things you say you want? What is the explanation you have rehearsed so many times it has stopped feeling like a story and started feeling like a fact? Look at it honestly, not harshly, just honestly, and ask, is this a description of my situation, or is it a way of avoiding my part in it? The answer to that question is where ownership begins. Chapter 2. What ownership is not. When people first encounter the idea of radical ownership, of taking full responsibility for their outcomes, they often have one of two reactions. The first reaction is resistance. They think, but it wasn't all my fault. Some of it was circumstances. Some of it was other people. You're asking me to pretend that external factors don't exist, and that isn't honest or fair. The second reaction is overcorrection. They swing to the opposite extreme. Everything is my fault. I should have done more. I should have known better. Every bad outcome is an indictment of my choices, my character, my worth as a person. Both reactions miss the point, and both of them, the resistance and the overcorrection, are actually forms of avoidance, because neither one leads to the clear, calm ownership that produces change. So let's be precise about what ownership is not. Ownership is not blame. Blame is a verdict. It assigns moral fault, declares a guilty party, and then stops. Ownership is a direction. It asks what can be done, by whom, with what resources, starting now. Blame is backward-looking and static. Ownership is forward-looking and active. These are not the same thing, and confusing them will poison the process before it starts. Ownership is not self-punishment. Some people hear take responsibility and translate it as feel worse about yourself. They pile on guilt, rehearse their failures, engage in a kind of prolonged self-criticism that they mistake for accountability. But self-punishment is not accountability. It is its opposite. Accountability requires clear thinking, and clear thinking is impossible when you are busy punishing yourself. The point of ownership is not to suffer, it is to see clearly and act effectively. Ownership is not the denial of external factors. Your circumstances are real. Other people's choices affect your outcomes. Systemic forces exist. Saying I own this does not mean pretending none of that is true. It means refusing to let those factors be the final word on what is possible. It means asking, given all of that, what is still within my reach? Ownership is not a one-time event. You don't become an accountable person in a single moment of decision. You become one through 1,000 small choices made consistently over time to respond to your situation rather than to explain it. It is a practice, not a destination. And finally, ownership is not about certainty. You don't have to be certain that your choices caused an outcome in order to look at your part in it honestly. You don't have to be certain that your actions will fix it in order to take action. Ownership operates in uncertainty. It says, I don't know exactly what will work, but I know that waiting for something outside me to change is not the answer. So I am going to act on what I can control and see what happens. What ownership actually is: the decision to look at your life, including the parts that are hard, unfair, complicated, and painful, and ask every time what you can do about it. Not what someone else should do, not what would happen if circumstances were different. What you can do today with what you have. That question asked consistently changes everything. Chapter 3: The Cost of Not Owning It. Avoidance has a cost. We rarely calculate it because it is paid in installments. Small amounts spread across a long time in a currency we don't always recognize as loss. But it accumulates. And over a lifetime, the cost of not owning your life is enormous. Let's look at what that cost actually is. The first cost is stagnation. When you don't own your situation, you don't change it. You explain it. You endure it. You adapt to it. You build your identity around it. But you don't change it. Because change requires action, and action requires believing that your actions matter. When you've outsourced the cause of your situation to external factors, you've also outsourced the power to change it. You are waiting for those external factors to shift. And while you wait, nothing moves. The second cost is resentment. The unowned life generates resentment almost automatically. When you believe that your situation is the result of what others have done, what they failed to provide, what they took, what they did to you, you carry a grievance, sometimes a justified one. But resentment is corrosive in ways that have nothing to do with whether it's justified. It directs your emotional energy outward, toward people and circumstances you cannot control, and away from your own choices and capacity. You spend your life writing a bill that no one is going to pay. The third cost is the erosion of self-respect. This one is subtle and takes time to fully see. But there is a relationship between accountability and self-respect that runs deeper than most people recognize. When you make choices and own them, when you stand behind your decisions, accept the consequences, and do not hide behind explanation, you develop a relationship with yourself that is built on integrity. When you consistently avoid that ownership, you develop a different kind of relationship with yourself, one in which you know at some level that you are not being fully honest. That knowing accumulates. It becomes a quiet diminishment. The fourth cost is mislearning. Every outcome, especially every bad outcome, contains information. It is telling you something about the choices that led to it, about what works and what doesn't, about the gap between your intentions and your actual behavior. When you explain the outcome away, you don't receive that information. You miss the lesson. And because you missed it, you are likely to repeat the pattern, different circumstances, same choices, same result, and explain that away too. The unowned life is often a repeated one. The fifth cost, perhaps the heaviest, is the life unlived. The risks not taken because the outcome might be your fault. The decisions not made because making them would mean owning the consequences. The relationships not pursued, the work not attempted, the change not initiated. All of it held back by the quiet fear that if you act and it goes wrong, you will have no one to blame but yourself. This fear is real, but think about what it protects you from: not failure, which will find you regardless. It protects you from ownership of your own life, from being the author rather than the subject. And the life lived as someone else's story in the passive voice is a very quiet kind of tragedy. The cost of not owning it is your agency. And agency, the ability to direct your own life, to act deliberately, to choose and bear the weight of choosing, is what makes a life feel like yours. It is worth whatever discomfort the owning costs. Chapter 4: How to Own What is Hard. Owning the easy things is not a practice. Owning the outcomes you're proud of, the choices that worked out, The decisions that look good in hindsight, this requires almost nothing. It is the hard things that test the commitment to ownership, and the hard things are where the practice actually lives. So what does it look like to own something genuinely difficult? It starts with stillness, not a dramatic, ceremonial stillness, just the ordinary act of pausing before the explanation begins. The explanation arrives very fast, almost automatically. It has usually been rehearsed many times. Before it runs, there is a brief window, a moment of not yet, in which you can ask the ownership question, what is my part in this? This window is short. Practice keeps it open longer. The next step is honest inventory. Not harsh, honest. What did I choose? What did I do? What did I not do that I could have done? Where was I not paying attention? Where did I know something and ignore it? Where did I act from fear or avoidance or comfort rather than from what I actually believed was right? This inventory is not a trial. It is not a list of indictments. It is an accurate account, taken for the purpose of learning and acting, not for the purpose of feeling bad. There is a particular skill required here, holding the complexity. You can own your part without denying the other parts. You can say, I contributed to this, and so did they. This was partly my doing, and partly circumstances beyond my control. The ownership does not have to be total to be real. You are not claiming that you caused everything. You are simply refusing to claim that you caused nothing. After the inventory, the decision. Not a grand resolution, not a vow, not a performance of accountability. A specific practical decision about what to do differently. This is where ownership becomes action rather than reflection. What will you change? What will you do today that you didn't do before? What behavior, what habit, what choice is within your reach and points in the direction you want to go? The smaller and more specific this decision, the better. I am going to be a different person is not a decision. I am going to tell that person the honest thing I have been avoiding is a decision. I am going to stop spending money on things I don't need before I have addressed the debt is a decision. Specific, actionable, today. There is one more element of owning what is hard, and it is the most important, doing it without an audience. Real accountability is private. It doesn't need to be witnessed or applauded. It doesn't require you to make a public declaration or perform remorse for others. The person you are accountable to, most deeply and most importantly, is yourself. The account you owe is to your own understanding of who you want to be and how you want to live. When you own something privately, when you look at it clearly, take your part in it honestly and decide what to do, something shifts, not dramatically, not overnight, but with repetition, it compounds into a person who trusts themselves, who knows they will face difficult things honestly, who has evidence built through practice that they are capable of owning hard things and moving forward from them. That is the person ownership builds, one honest inventory at a time. Chapter 5. Owning your time, your words, your word. Ownership is not only about the big things, the headline moments, the failures, the relationships, the career decisions. These get most of the attention, but ownership is also, and perhaps more fundamentally, about the ordinary things. The small daily choices that most people don't think of as choices at all. 3 of the most important: your time, your words, and your word. Your time. Time is the one resource that cannot be recovered, replenished, or borrowed, and yet most people treat it as if it belongs to everyone else, to the demands of others, to whatever is loudest, to the path of least resistance through the day. They arrive at the end of a week and cannot account for where it went. They arrive at the end of a year with the same things undone that were undone at the beginning. Owning your time means accepting that how you spend it is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. Even when the obligations feel external, the busyness feels imposed, the hours feel consumed rather than directed. The question is not whether there are demands on your time. There always are. The question is whether you are choosing how to respond to those demands or simply reacting to them. This is not about productivity systems or optimization. It is about honesty. Are you spending time on the things you say matter to you? If not, why not, and what are you going to do about it? That is the ownership question applied to the daily hours of your life. Your words, what you say to other people and to yourself is a choice, and it is a choice that most people make unconsciously, reflexively, shaped by habit and mood, and the path of social least resistance. Owning your words means paying attention to what you actually say and why. Are you honest, or do you tell people what they want to hear to avoid discomfort? Do you say yes when you mean no, and then resent the person you said yes to? Do you make promises you don't keep? Commitments you abandon? Statements you don't mean? Do you speak about people behind their backs in ways you wouldn't speak to their faces? None of this requires perfection. It requires awareness. The person who owns their words is not someone who always says exactly the right thing. They are someone who pays attention to the gap between what they say and what they mean, and who works to close it. There is also a specific kind of ownership of words that is worth naming. Owning what you say about yourself. The internal monologue, the story you tell yourself about your capacity, your worth, your likelihood of succeeding at the things that matter to you. These words are not neutral. They shape what you attempt, what you sustain, what you believe is possible. Owning them means choosing them deliberately rather than inheriting them unconsciously. Your word. This is different from your words. Your word is the thing you commit to. It is your yes and your no, the promises you make to other people and the commitments you make to yourself. Many people have a complex relationship with their own word. They overcommit, then underdeliver. They make promises under social pressure that they have no real intention of keeping. They tell themselves they will do something, exercise, write, call, finish, and then they don't. And then they tell themselves they will again, and don't again. Over time, this erodes something essential. When you routinely don't do what you said you would do, you stop trusting yourself. Not consciously, not dramatically, but the small accumulation of broken self-agreements builds a quiet doubt about whether your commitments mean anything. And that doubt makes the next commitment less likely to stick. Owning your word means making fewer commitments and keeping them. It means saying no to things you cannot genuinely commit to. It means treating your promises to yourself with the same seriousness you would treat promises to people you deeply respect. Because the person most affected by whether you keep your word is you. Time, words, word. Own these three daily, and the bigger ownership will follow naturally. Chapter 6, The Life You Author. There is a difference between the life that happens to you and the life you author. Both lives contain the same raw material: circumstances, other people, luck, time, limitation, possibility. The difference is not in what is present, it is in who is directing. In one life, you are the subject, acted upon, carried forward by whatever current is running. In the other, you are the author, making choices, bearing their weight, moving towards something you have decided matters. Most lives contain both. There are seasons of being carried, seasons of directing, and long stretches where the two are mixed together in ways that are difficult to separate. No one authors their life completely, and no one is purely subject to forces beyond their control. The question is not which of these is true, both are always, but which orientation you bring to the life you are living. The life you author is not a perfect life. The author makes mistakes, gets things wrong, chooses badly sometimes, and lives with the consequences of choices that turned out not to be wise. But the author also learns from those mistakes because they own them. The author grows because growth requires honest feedback, and honest feedback requires accountability. The author builds something because building requires directed effort over time, and directed effort requires believing that your direction matters. The life you author is not a comfortable life. Ownership is sometimes uncomfortable. The inventory is sometimes painful. The admission of your part is sometimes humbling. The commitment to do something differently is sometimes demanding. Comfort, the easy kind, the kind that comes from avoiding difficult truths, is in shorter supply when you are living accountably. But it is replaced by something better, by self-respect, by the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are facing your life clearly, by the sense of movement, not always fast, not always visible but real, that comes from acting on what is within your reach rather than waiting for what is not. There is also something about owning your life that changes your relationship to other people. When you are not in the business of assigning blame, you are freed from the constant ledger keeping that comes with it. You stop needing people to admit fault. You stop being in an adversarial relationship with your circumstances. You stop spending energy on the case you are building against the forces that have wronged you. This is not passivity. It is not forgiveness on demand or pretending that injustice doesn't exist. It is simply the recognition that your energy is finite, and that the portion of it spent explaining your situation rather than changing it is energy spent in the wrong direction. The owned life is a forward-facing life. It is oriented toward what can be done by you, now, with what you have. It is interested in the present and the future more than in the past. Not because the past doesn't matter, but because the past is the only part of the equation you cannot change. Here is what it looks like in practice to author your life. You wake up and you make choices, not grand choices, small ones. How you spend the first hour, what you give your attention to, who you show up for, what you do with the difficulty you are carrying. Whether you take the action you have been putting off or find one more reason to wait. You make these choices and you own them. You don't explain them away or outsource their cause. You make them and they are yours and they add up, day by day, choice by choice, into the direction your life is moving. And at the end of that life, whenever it comes, you will be able to say, I drove this, not perfectly, not without mistakes, not without the help of others and the grace of circumstances I didn't earn. But I drove it, I showed up, I chose, I owned it. That in the end is the whole of the practice. Own it, all of it, and see what becomes possible when you do. A note at the end. There is something you are not owning. Not a criticism, a certainty, because there is always something. There is always a corner of the life we are explaining rather than directing. A narrative we have polished until it no longer feels like a narrative, a part of ourselves we have not yet looked at clearly. This is not a failure. It is simply the nature of the work. Ownership is not an arrival. It is an orientation, a direction you keep choosing, imperfectly, over and over, for the length of a life. So the invitation is not to own everything perfectly today. It is simply to ask the question, the one that changes everything more often than you did before. What is my part in this? And then to answer it honestly, and then to do something about it. That is the whole of it. That is the practice. Own it.